So we're going to talk about how to get Agile with Scrum, how to bring more agility into your organization. I grabbed this quote out of this article because I like this quote. I think it gives us a good feel for what Scrum is about. Nobody is doing Scrum in '86. Nobody was doing it in '86. What happened is a couple of Japanese researchers wanted to find out what was working well in product development, not software development, product development. They went around and they studied successful companies. They labeled what they saw Scrum. So that's where the name Scrum came into things. These authors wrote that the relay race approach to product development. Now, most of us are software people. What's another word we use for relay race approach? What do you think they're talking about there? We're software people, right? What's the big nasty process? Waterfall, right? Talking about waterfall. So the waterfall approach may conflict with the goals of maximum speed and flexibility. They say instead what we want is a holistic or rugby approach. There's where this word scrum is going to come in. It's part of the game rugby. They say we want this rugby approach where a team tries to go the distance as a unit, passing the ball back and forth, and that may better serve today's competitive requirements. Now focus on that last phrase for a second. Today's competitive requirements. Remember when I told you this was written, 1986. They were saying waterfall doesn't work. It's 1986. Waterfall's too slow for us. We need something better. Well, what are we doing thinking 26 years later that waterfall might even possibly work, right? Today's competitive requirements, 2012, 2013's competitive requirements, we absolutely need something that is going to lead to faster and more flexible products. Right? So this is where Scrum's going to come in. So Scrum gets its name from rugby in the middle there. And fortunately, I played rugby one drunken day during university. So I can explain what a Scrum is all about from that one drunken day. We used to play American football every Saturday when I was in university. The guys in my dorm, we'd get together, play American football every Saturday. One Saturday, we had a guy from London who said, no, we're playing rugby next week. And we said, okay, you're going to have to teach us how. And he did. He taught us how to play it. I'm not sure all of his rules were the official rules, which explains why it was a drunken Saturday. One of his rules was the mandatory beer break every 5 minutes. All right? So every 5 minutes, we'd run over the sideline, have a beer, and come back and start up again. And the thing I remember from him teaching us how to play, my job, I lined up over here on the right side. I was in the front of a line of 3 people. I had my left arm out. Steve, our guy from London, was over here on the left side with his right arm out. In between us was a third guy. We were actually holding him up. He didn't have his feet on the ground. And our job was to push forward. The guy without his feet on the ground, his job was to kick the ball. The ball was rolled in between us like a puck would be dropped in a hockey game. And so this was this metaphor for what software development was all about. It was this idea of kind of a chaotic environment, everybody with their own special responsibilities, though, but a very common purpose. And we were locked together. We had our arms around each other. The guy in the middle, for example, if he took his arms away, he'd fall down on the ground. Right? So we had our arms together pushing for a common purpose. This is where this metaphor came from. I worked with a lot of different companies in the US and Europe. And one of the companies I've worked with off and on for the last 24 years has been Apple. I want to just share a little quote from Apple here, actually from an article about Apple. This is from an article in Time Magazine, a news magazine in the US. And the author in here wrote that Apple employees talk incessantly about what they call deep collaboration, cross-pollination, or concurrent engineering. Essentially, it means that products don't pass from team to team. There aren't discrete sequential development stages. There's no handoffs or anything. They said instead it's simultaneous and organic. Products get worked on in parallel by all departments at once, design, hardware, software, and endless rounds of interdisciplinary design review. Now, if you ask Apple what they're doing, they call it their own thing. They call it the Apple process. Right? But this is very much Scrum. This is very much Scrum what they're doing here. Right? So Scrum is about these lack of handoffs. It's about working together, interdisciplinary design, right? All working together, deep collaboration. Now, just kind of starting this out here, I just want to list a couple of the companies that Scrum has been used in. Not going to read all those. You can take a look at these. This is, by the way, this presentation is on my website. This presentation is fully available in PowerPoint and Keynote format for you to grab and make your own. So you got to go back and introduce Agile or Scrum to your organization. You can use this presentation. This slide was really useful 10 years ago when I first started putting a lot of this together, because people then were wondering, well, who's using Scrum? It's kind of a dumb slide now. Just about everybody's using Scrum, right? We can make thousands of companies on a list like this for people who are using Scrum, so it's not that unique anymore. Scrum's also been used in just about every type of application: video games, Department of Defense in the US, government applications, commercial applications, websites, federally regulated banks. In fact, used by the main bank in the US, our Federal Reserve. It's used in medical devices, so Scrum is used on just about anything. A couple of the characteristics of Scrum: Scrum's focused on having what are called self-organizing teams. Self-organizing team means that we do not have one person, typically called a tech lead or something like that, who gets to assign out all the tasks. Why don't you do this, you do that, you do the other, and I'll do the fun thing. Right? We don't have that person on a Scrum project. On a Scrum project, the team self-organizes. They're given a challenge. Build this, we need it by the end of the year. And the team figures out how to do that collaboratively. They work together. Hey, I was thinking of doing this. Well, so was I. Why don't we work on it together? Right? So the team together figures out who's the appropriate person to work on something. There's not one person who gets to delegate that task assignment out. Another characteristic of Scrum is that the product or project is built in a series of what are called sprints. Each sprint is anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks, right? No longer than a month. Some teams will do calendar month sprints. Those are very rare. Most common, 2 weeks. So teams will work in these little 2-week increments, and they'll build some part of the product each 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, we get to see what the team has worked on, give feedback on it or get feedback on it, show it to customers, and we use that information to inform what to do next. Do customers like what we built? Scrum uses something called a product backlog. So this is a term we'll hear. Doing a session on the product backlog, the end of the day today. The last session will be on the product backlog, and something called user stories. You've heard much about Agile. You might have come across this term, user stories. They're just a way of capturing requirements. I was thinking of the product backlog as a prioritized features list. So it's a list of things we want, prioritized by somebody we call a product owner. One of the nice things, I think, but also a dangerous thing about Scrum, is it doesn't prescribe any engineering practices. Scrum doesn't say you have to do test-driven development. Doesn't say you have to pair program. Doesn't say you have to have automated testing. In fact, it doesn't say you have to test at all. Right? Scrum doesn't say anything about the engineering practices. The engineering practices are left where they should be for the team to figure out. Now, all those things I just listed, I think, are all good things. Right? Scrum doesn't say you have to have version control. I've never met a good Scrum team that didn't. Right? But that's up to the team to figure out. What's nice about this, what this means, is that Scrum is a general purpose project management framework. Scrum can be used for all sorts of things, not just software. In fact, if you think back a few minutes where I said it originated in product development, not even software development. Scrum started to take off when it hit the software world because software has such a need for speed and flexibility. But Scrum can be used anywhere. One of my favorite examples is every year there are examples of people who plan their weddings with Scrum. Right? Think about that. Right? Normally things like pick spouse are already done, right? But the rest of the product backlog has things like pick the venue, pick the caterer, create the guest list, pick the music, all that type of stuff. So people will use Scrum to manage all sorts of projects. Right? Now, it wouldn't make any sense to plan a wedding if you had test-driven development. Right? How do you do that? Right? So one of the things that is nice about Scrum too is it's fairly straightforward. It's fairly simple. There's no 200-page rule book on Scrum. There's not this massive list of rules. You got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. The few rules that we do have in Scrum are what are called generative rules. Generative rules. They're there not so much because we care about the actual following of the rule as we care about the behavior that following that rule generates. So one of the things you might have heard about Scrum is we have a daily stand-up or a daily Scrum meeting. Teams come together and talk once a day for 10 to 15 minutes. I don't really care that we get together. I don't really care that we have those 15 minutes of discussion. What I care about is the discussion it creates. Right? So we've learned that having teams talk frequently is a great thing. One of the easy ways to generate that behavior, that's what we want, is to put in place this rule. Get together once a day and talk. So it's not the rule that we care about as much as the behavior that it creates. Then I mentioned that Scrum is one of the Agile processes. Lots of different other Agile processes. Feature-driven development, adaptive, Kanban, extreme programming, lean, DSDM, Crystal. Don't know if I've already mentioned that one. Lots of other Agile processes. Scrum is the most popular. Recent surveys showed about 70% of people doing Agile were doing Scrum. So Scrum by far the most popular. Now here's where Scrum is the most successful. This is a graph showing the mapping of, on the horizontal axis, how uncertain our technology is. And maybe you're doing your 1 millionth Java application. You're pretty close to certainty. Maybe you're doing your first closure application. Okay, way over on the right now. We've never done that. We've never built anything like this. Right? On the vertical axis, what we're showing is how far from agreement we are on requirements. Do we know what we're building? Right? We are building a simple address book. Right? There's bunches of these out there. We know the requirements. We can copy them from other products. That would be low on the vertical axis. Are we doing something novel, something that has never been done before? Right? Or at least not by us. We'd be high up on that vertical axis. So what we're looking at here, if you map these two, we can see the projects that have a lot of technical uncertainty, a lot of lack of agreement on the requirement side is going to be in the top right there. We call that anarchy, right? Probably nothing's going to work there, right? You've got a lot of technical uncertainty. You're not even sure what you're building yet. The best thing to do is get some certainty around one of those two things. Before you build the world's biggest, scariest, most novel closure application, get some experience with the language, right? Or prototype something so you know what it is you're building. Move out of the anarchy region in one direction. Let's go down to the bottom. Down in the bottom left there, we've got simple. Now, this is right in a simple address book. Done it before, same technology. You can be successful with other processes here. Scrum can be okay, but it's not going to get you huge benefits there. Where Scrum is particularly helpful is what are called the complicated and complex regions in there, where we have fair amounts of both technical uncertainty. This is going to be tough. I don't know how we're going to do this. I've done stuff like it before, but never exactly this. And I'm not exactly sure what we're building. We've got a vision. We're headed out here, but we have to see what our customers say. Those type of projects, when there's a fair amount of uncertainty, that's where Scrum's going to have its biggest benefits for us. That's where most of our projects are too, right? Especially in the software world. So let's look at what Scrum is all about. And by the way, if you have questions at any point, just raise your hand or signal me in some way. I'd like to take questions as we go. I keep kind of scanning back and forth. We've got this weird, long, skinny room, so I keep trying to see if we have any comments or questions. If we do, just raise your hand. I'll pause and take a question. So let's see what Scrum looks like. So let's build up a Scrum process diagram here. We're going to start out with something called our product backlog. This is that prioritized features list. Now suppose we're going to build an e-commerce website. I've got a couple of features I want to add to our site. We've got a basic site up. We're no Amazon yet, but we've got a basic site going, and we'd like to add to this return, gift wrap, and cancel. Those are the features we want next. Our product owner prioritizes those features for us. The team is going to make progress against those features in sprints. These are the 1 to 4 week time periods I mentioned. At the start of a sprint, the team has to figure out, what are we going to do? And so the team gets together and has a meeting to discuss the product owner's priorities. And they select some amount of work off the product backlog. In this case, I've only selected one item. A team will almost always grab more than one. For graphical simplicity, I'm just grabbing one item here. Makes the picture easier. So in this sprint, our team has decided we will deliver returns. People can return a purchased item. I don't like this book. I'm sending it back. All right? Hope I didn't read it first. To do this, we have what we call a sprint planning meeting. The sprint planning meeting is where the team selects the amount of work to do. In the sprint planning meeting, the team creates what is called their sprint backlog. A sprint backlog is a list of tasks necessary to deliver the product backlog. Now, here's something I wish we hadn't done in Scrum. I really wish we hadn't done this. We've overloaded the word backlog. Product backlog, sprint backlog. There's two, okay? There's two. Product backlog, big visible features. Look at the things up there. Cancel, gift wrapping, right? Return an item. Those type of things. Big visible things. Customers might see those. The sprint backlog is tasks. It's going to be things like design the UI, right? code, test, create some test data, automate this, have a review meeting with the customer about such and such, those type of things. Those will be our task list, our sprint backlog. At the end of the sprint, the team comes out with something we call potentially shippable product increment. Basically what we're talking about here is finished, done, tested, working code. Right? Some feature is done. And we put the word potentially there to indicate that we do not need to ship this thing. Right? We may not release this at the end of the sprint, the end of the couple of weeks, but we could if we wanted to. It's high enough quality that we could. Right? So what we're after here is something that's high quality, potentially shippable. One of the things that appealed to me about Scrum when I first started to learn about this is that Scrum takes essentially a two-faced approach to change. Scrum says no change in the sprint. No change in the sprint. What we're trying to do there is allow the team time to focus. So the team doesn't have to be always looking over their shoulder going, things are going to change. I shouldn't make this big change in the code. They're going to change direction on me. I shouldn't tear this apart. I know I'm about to get interrupted. Right? So we want to create an environment where the team can focus. But we know change happens. We have to accommodate that change. So we let that change happen at the level of the product backlog. Meaning if our product owner comes up with a new ideas, hey, let's take vouchers. Let's offer vouchers on our e-commerce website. That comes in as a new feature idea, a new product backlog item, and the product backlog is sorted, putting vouchers in where it belongs. Right, so change happens outside the sprint. We lock the sprint down, letting the team focus on what it is they're building that sprint. One last thing I want to toss in up here, being the top middle, I'm going to toss in our daily stand-up. Daily stand-up, this is where the team gets together 10 to 15 minutes a day. It's limited, no more than 15 minutes, and they talk about it. It's a synchronization meeting. It's not a status meeting. Status meeting always sounds, well, first it sounds boring. Second, it sounds one-directional. I will give my status report to the project manager. You won't listen while I give my report, and then while you give your report, I won't listen. Right? That's a status meeting. This isn't a status meeting. This is a synchronization meeting. This is team members talking to each other. Right? Here's what I'm doing. What are you working on? Anybody stuck? We go through things like that, trying to keep the project on track. So that's it. There's nothing else to Scrum but what's shown up here. Okay. By the way, somebody asked me this morning why I was qualified to talk about Scrum. I didn't really start with my bio slide or anything this morning because we're time pressed, so I didn't want to bore you with my background. But somebody did ask why I was qualified to talk about Scrum. So here's why. I have a Scrum tattoo. I have that picture on the wall on me. So if I'm tattooed with Scrum, I feel qualified to talk about it. Those of you close enough can tell that is a fake Scrum tattoo. At the end of the day, at the end of our session today, help yourself. I got a bunch of Scrum tattoos up here. So if you're at all bought into this, grab some Scrum tattoos on the way out. I don't want to fly them home to the U.S., so take as many of those as you want. I hate going back to animated slides. But I just want to pause here in case there are any questions on that, because this is kind of the whole framework in case this brings up any questions anybody has right now. Okay, let's get through our animation here. I want to talk about sprints, these 1 to 4 week time boxes where the team is making progress on the project. By far the most common is a 2-week iteration. My recommendation here is to find a length that works for you and stick with it. Right? Do not bounce around. Don't go 2 weeks, 1 week, 4 week, 3, 2, 2, 2, 1, 4, 2. Don't bounce around. Find a length that works for you and stick with it. Okay? A lot of factors influence our sprint length. Sometimes it's things like how long our product owner or business can go without changing their minds. Right? Sometimes it's how quickly we need to deliver things to the market. Right? So pick a length that works for you. It's not a life sentence. You can change it a few months from now. Right? If it's not working for you, change it by all means. But don't bounce. Don't bounce around. Okay? That rhythm is beneficial. I don't like 4-week sprints. That's our maximum. Well, calendar month is our maximum. We end on the 18th. Very few people do that. Some people will do a 4-week sprint. Every 4 weeks, we start a new cycle. I don't like 4-week sprints. One of the reasons I don't like 4-week sprints is it leads to thinking like this. Oh, we got 4 weeks. Let's use the first week for analysis. We'll do design the second week, code the third week, and we'll test the fourth week. Right? And that's not what we want to do on a Scrum project. On a Scrum project, what we would like to do is to have a little bit of everything happening all the time. There should always be some design going on, always be some coding going on. Right now, in differing amounts, we're not going to be doing most of our coding the last day. At least I hope not. But we want to balance that out. But we should not have a distinct, we're in the analysis phase of the sprint. And when we go to a really short sprint cycle, teams figure that out. Right? You only got a week. You're not going to have a day of analysis, a day of design, a day of coding. You only got a week. Right? So teams will figure that out with the shorter sprint lengths. Longer sprints, it tends to get tempting to introduce phases into our sprints. Not a good thing. Okay? Talked about no changes. No changes in a sprint. This slide's just kind of repeating that. Right? What we're trying to do here is to create an environment where the team is allowed to focus. I remember it was about 2 weeks ago, before I left on this trip, I'd left the office, I went home, and I was still trying to get some writing done. I write books, and so I was still trying to get some writing done at home, and it wasn't particularly, but it was starting to get close to dinner time, and I could hear my wife banging around in the kitchen, dinner's getting ready, and so, I don't want to start on this new article I have due, because, it's almost dinner time, I don't want to get my head into the article, and so I replied to some email, I read a couple documents, okay, I played a game too, and dinner should be done by now. It's only like 45 minutes. You're out there banging around. My wife's a good cook, but it's not like she cooks things that, take hours to cook. So it's like, dinner's got to be ready by now. And so I go ask her, what time are we eating? And she said, not for another hour, right? Our daughters had longer dance practice or something, so they weren't going to be home at the normal time. And so what had happened here is I'd let all that time escape because I was kind of feeling this, constant, I'm about to be interrupted for dinner. I'm about to be interrupted for dinner. And so I didn't get productive. I just kind of let that time slip away. So we're trying to create an environment where the team does not feel like they're about to be interrupted. You've got 2 weeks. I will not change my mind on you. Go build gift wrapping or vouchers or whatever it is we've chosen to do in that sprint. So we try to leave the team alone, let them focus, create that environment for them. The Scrum framework is made up of 3 things. We've got roles. We have 3 roles on a Scrum project. We have ceremonies, activities that happen on a Scrum project, and we have artifacts. So what I'd like to do is to dive into these roles, ceremonies, and artifacts. Let's start with our 3 roles. The first role on a Scrum project is that of product owner. Our product owner is our key business representative, kind of the key stakeholder. This is the person who is often funding the project or who represents the users to us on the project. Product owners are responsible for the product backlog, for making sure the product backlog is in the right order. Product owners are also responsible for making what I refer to as scope schedule trade-off decisions. Scope schedule trade-off decisions. Here's what I mean. We're sitting here in early June, and we're thinking about it. Should we release in September with that much functionality? We can have that much by September. Well, or we could have that much by October. September, October, September, October. And so our product owner makes that scope versus schedule trade-off decision. When would be the right time to release? Early with not as many features, later with more. And so they're the one who makes those type of decisions for us. One of the nice things about Scrum, we don't need to decide that today. Right? Some of us do. But others of us can wait until maybe August. And in August, we'll decide, okay, we're pulling the trigger in September. It's going to be September release. Or we might get to August and go, our competitor didn't release their product. Let's skip September. We'll go to October, and we'll really have a bunch of features in there for our customers. Right? So often, we don't have to make that decision now. At the end of the sprint, the product owner is shown by the team what they built. And the product owner accepts or rejects each of the product backlog items. The product owner can look at it and say, I love what you did with return. That's fantastic. Vouchers, we got to go back. We got to make some changes to vouchers. So the product owner accepts or rejects the work of the team at the end of each sprint. Now, I often think of the team as a race car. That makes sense. The team's job is to go as fast as they can. So the team's a race car. The product owner is the driver of the race car. They're the one aiming the car at the right goal. We have another role on a Scrum project called a ScrumMaster. You might have heard about this role. It's got a weird name, ScrumMaster. Now we've got this ScrumMaster role. I think of the ScrumMaster as the mechanic for the car. The ScrumMaster's job is to have that car as tuned up, as ready to go as possible. So the ScrumMaster helps the team go as quickly as they can, but not necessarily in the right direction. That's the product owner's job, to get the team aimed in the right direction. So we have product owner, ScrumMaster, and team. The ScrumMaster is often the one who is supposed to know Scrum the best, They're the one that helps the team use Scrum to be successful. They're the one who might make decisions like how long our sprint should be. They'll certainly look for input from the product owner and team, but they might be the one who makes that decision. Right? The Scrum Master's job, when I first started hiring Scrum Masters, I started doing this in '95. We didn't have the title Scrum Master. And so I needed to hire people to effectively do this job. We knew we needed this job, but we didn't have a name for it. I just called them project managers back then, but they were a very different type of project manager. And I told them their job was to be bulldozer and shield. Right? Bulldozer and shield. Right? They were a bulldozer. Any problem in the team's way, get it out of the way. That's your job. You're a shield. You're there to protect the team from any sort of outside distraction. Right? Later, we started to think about the metaphor of coach for Scrum Master. So I also think of the Scrum Master as a coach, somebody there helping the team on to their best performance. And we think about a coach on a sports team. Right? Scrum Master is a coach. They're there to help the team be the best they can be. Okay. The third role is team. Team. Only 3 roles we have on a Scrum project: product owner, Scrum Master, and team. Typical team size, 5 to 9 people. I hate putting a number up there, though. I have to do it. If I didn't, you would ask me that. How big should a team be, or can it be? 5 to 9. For me, that does include the product owner and Scrum Master. 5 to 9. I don't like putting a number here, though. I like instead how Amazon does it. Amazon talks about their teams as being what they call a 2-pizza team. A team they can feed with 2 pizzas is the right size. Right? And I like that as a way to think about our team size. By the way, if you're hiring, that's me and 1 small tester. Right? Some days a very small tester. So, as silly as that is, I think it's the right way to think about our team sizes, right? And I'm not picking on any food allergies. I've got my own. But if you have a big team, you're not going to remember what people can eat and don't eat or like to eat, things like that. If you've got an 8-person team, you know how many pizzas to order, and you remember you've got 2 people who are vegetarian, right? If you've got a 23-person team, how many vegetarians do we have again? And is he still gluten-free? Right? I mean, it's too hard. It's too hard, right? So if ordering lunch for the team is hard, the team's too big. I think that's the Amazon lesson. And 5 to 9, a real good sweet spot for our Scrum teams. Scrum teams are meant to be cross-functional. They're meant to have everybody we need to go from idea to implementation. Everybody we need from idea to implementation. We can take a product backlog item and fully implement it, meaning that team will have programmers and testers, maybe database people, maybe UI designers. UI's not important, though. At least that's what I heard this morning, right? No, we're going to, some teams it is, some teams it's not, right? No, you're doing more of an API team or something, right? But we're going to have everybody on that team necessary to go from idea to implementation. I'd like most of those individuals to be full-time, but I got the word should up there, right? I know in today's world we're not always going to have everybody full-time, but the more we can do that, the better off we're going to be. Self-organizing, we touched on this. We said there is no one person, no tech lead who gets to assign out all the tasks. And then the last one, barely worth touching on here. Membership should change between sprints. It's just too confusing for teams if you're getting new team members in the middle of the sprint. So we try to put any team member switches should happen at the sprint boundaries. Okay. So those are our 3 roles on a Scrum project. Let's touch on the 4 ceremonies of Scrum. 4 ceremonies. We've got one called sprint planning, one called sprint review, another one called a sprint retrospective, and then a daily Scrum. So we'll start with our planning meeting. The other 3 meetings in Scrum are very short, very short. This one, long and painful. This one's going to be a few hours. Some teams will take a whole day to do this if they have a long sprint, complex project perhaps. Most teams will get this done in 2 to 3 hours, but some teams will spend longer. Everybody attends. The team, the Scrum Master, the product owner, the whole team is going to be there. That's going to be a consistent theme across all 4 of these meetings. The agenda is for the team to talk about the top of the product backlog. Remember the product backlog, our prioritized features list. We don't talk about the whole thing. The whole product backlog, there may be stuff on there we're never going to do. There may be stuff further down in that prioritized list we're not going to do for 6 months. We're not going to talk about that stuff. But we're going to come together and talk about the top items. What might we do this sprint? What's a little bit beyond this sprint? Maybe we can get it in. So the team will talk about the top of the product backlog. They select what to do. That is a really important bullet point. The team selects what to do. The product owner does not tell the team. The product owner does not get to say, hey, we got 4 sprints left. You got to do 1/4. No, the team selects how much they can do. Teams are empowered to select the amount they can do. Now, they should be motivated and they should do as much as they can. They shouldn't go, we get to choose, okay. Right, we'll just do that much. Right? The team should do as much as they can, but it's up to them. Nobody gets to say, you have to do 8 items or you have to do 1/4 of the backlog. The reason why we do this meeting is to feel like that what we are going to do has been talked about in enough detail that we understand it well enough to have a chance of succeeding with it. We come out of this meeting with 2 things. We come out with something called a sprint goal and something called a sprint backlog. I mentioned the sprint backlog earlier. Sprint backlog is going to be a list of tasks. Sprint goal, just kind of a 1-sentence summary. Right? It gives us a 1-sentence summary we can use to describe to outsiders. Your boss's boss wants to know what you're working on. That becomes our sprint goal, 1-sentence summary of what we're doing. Okay. The way this works is we come together, the whole team, product owner, scrum master, and team members, and the team looks at the top of the product backlog. They read that backlog item and they say, okay, what do we have to do? They create the list of tasks. Most teams will estimate those tasks. So that's going to take 6 hours. That's going to take 4 hours. Mostly breaking things down into the, kind of 4 to 10 hour range, most tasks. They commit to 1 item. They grab a 2nd item. They break it into tasks, estimate the hours, commit to it. They grab a 3rd. Right, and they keep breaking these things down. Now, this is called a sprint planning meeting, but I think the meeting is a little bit misnamed, right? Because it's not just a planning meeting. It is also a design meeting. The team is doing technical design in this meeting. The team is doing product design in this meeting. See what I mean here? We're in this meeting, and the team says, how should we handle this error? What should we do if the user types in this? The product owner says, wow, I'd want you to do this, and we've got to make sure this doesn't happen. That's product design. It's also technical design. When the team is making their list of tasks, they're talking about things like, wow, should we do this in the middle tier? No. We got to do this in the UI. Right? It's got to be more responsive than that. Let's do this in the JavaScript. And so this is a technical design, a product design, and a planning meeting, all 3 together. It's one of the reasons it takes a long time. And that's also the reason I don't get too frustrated when it's taking a long time, because it's us there designing the project, right? Designing the feature at a high level, at the technical and product level. Okay? It's our sprint planning meeting. Longest, only real painful meeting on Scrum. The shortest meeting on Scrum, the daily Scrum. Right? Here is where we get together once a day for 15 minutes maximum, not guaranteed minimum, 15 minutes maximum, and we talk about how things are going. Right? This is a chance for team members to synchronize their effort. It is not a problem-solving meeting. We're not there to solve issues. We're there to just discuss things. Now, it's very common for the team to hang around afterwards, maybe half the team, and solve a problem. But we don't maintain that or mandate that the whole team has to stay there to solve some problem that came up. Right? We just kind of raise issues, discuss things. Right? Oh, I came across this weirdest little a bug yesterday, but I got it fixed. I recommend everybody change this parameter to your JVM. Right? Something like that might get mentioned. Others are like, I'm really stuck on this. Can somebody pair with me for a half hour today? I just need to talk it through with somebody to figure out what's going on. Right? So we talk through issues like that in this meeting. Right? The meeting is meant to be for team members only. Now, we allow others to talk, but it's meant, or we allow others to attend, but it's meant to be only for team members to talk during this meeting. I might be wondering why I got those weird chickens up on the screens. Let me explain the weird chickens up there. There's an old joke in the Scrum world. You got to know this old joke if you're going to be anywhere near Scrum. The old joke is this. There's a chicken and a pig walking down the street. When the chicken decides, let's start a restaurant. Let's start a restaurant. What do you think, pig? And the pig says, that is an intriguing idea. I'm a very entrepreneurial type of hog. I'm sick of working for the farmer. Let's do it. But the pig says, what are we going to call the business? What are we going to call the restaurant? And the chicken says, let's call the restaurant Ham and Eggs. And the pig says, no thanks. I'd be committed. You'd only be involved. Right? Yeah, not the funniest old joke, Not the funniest old joke, but a very common joke in the Scrum world. And it is meant to point out the difference between that chicken who just lays an egg or two and the pig who lays down his life to be part of the breakfast. Right? Now, nobody likes to be called a chicken or a pig, so I'm going to beg your permission to let me refer to people as chickens and pigs for the next 60 seconds or so. Because here's the idea. The idea is that team members are committed. They're pigs. The ScrumMaster is a pig. Right? The ScrumMaster is committed. There's debate. Sometimes there's debate about the product owner. Is the product owner committed? Are they a pig? Or are they just involved? Or are they just a chicken? Well, here's the answer. The early days of Scrum, the 90s, product owners were chickens, and we were happy to have that. Yeah, but the 1990s model of product owner was somebody who showed up, said, here's what I want, I'll see you in a month. And they came back in a month, and they told us if they liked it or not. Right? What we've learned is it's a much better model to have a committed product owner, somebody who is a full-on team member, somebody who is there, not necessarily every day, but somebody who is there at least mentally with the team during the process. So, today's world of the product owners are pigs. They are committed team members. They are allowed to talk in the daily Scrum. But your CEO, and I'm generalizing here, I'm assuming your CEO is not also one of your best programmers. Your CEO shows up at the daily Scrum. We tell your CEO, ooh, sorry, please be quiet for a few minutes. We'll finish our meeting, and then we'd love to hear any questions you've got for us. But let us get around the room and do our daily Scrum first. In going around the room, we answer 3 questions. Each team member answers 3 questions. What did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? Is there anything in your way? Right? I said earlier that these are not status reports. Okay? These are team members sharing information with each other. Let's look at the other 2 meetings. We've got a sprint review and a sprint retrospective. Similar meetings, very different in terms of what happens, but similar meetings in this sense. The review is about inspecting and adapting on the product. We look at the product, we inspect the product, and we adapt. We make changes. Customers aren't going to like this. Oh, wow, customers love this new UI we've added on this part of the application. Let's go do more of that. So we inspect and adapt on the product. The retrospective, we inspect and adapt on the process. We talk about how Scrum's working for us, and we make changes to the process. So the review, we inspect and adapt on the product. It is a demo. The team demonstrates what they've built. Now, takes very different forms in different companies. In some companies, we're demonstrating to the product owner. In other cases, the product owner is demonstrating to outside stakeholders. Right? Typically going to be up to an hour-long meeting. I don't want this to go much longer than that. It's a hard one to predict because if you're doing longer sprints, you're doing stuff that's very UI intensive, you can have a longer sprint review than a team that's building a commercial API into something, right? Everybody's got an opinion on colors and user interfaces, right? So those type of meetings will take longer, okay? So this is the review. We're getting feedback. We're looking for things we should change. In the retrospective, we're looking for things we should change in the process. We're talking about how is Scrum working for us. And we might decide Scrum's fantastic, but not those 4-week sprints. Let's go down to 2-week sprints. Nah, I think 3-week is better. Let's go to 3-week. Let's start with that. Right? Or I think Scrum's doing okay for us, but our product backlog items aren't detailed enough. We're coming into the sprint with just something that says cancel an order. That's not enough detail. We need a little more detail before we start. Let's find a way to add detail to our product backlog items. Or maybe the other way around, we got too much detail in our backlog items. So in a retrospective, we're looking at ways to improve the process. My favorite way to do the retrospective is just in what we call a start, stop, continue meeting. And we have the team come together and say, what should we start doing? What should we stop doing? What should we continue? Right? So not very touchy-feely here. I don't really care, ooh, how do we feel? Right? No, what are we going to change? Right? Very action-oriented. What are we going to start doing? Right? What are we going to stop doing? So we're focused on things very directly actionable that we can change in the sprint. Lots of other ways to do a sprint retrospective. This is just my preferred way to do this. Okay? Let's look at our artifacts. Product backlog. The product backlog, I mentioned this earlier, is the requirements list on a project. It's prioritized by somebody called our product owner. Right? And the idea with the product backlog is that each item in a product backlog, I always kind of think of it as an Excel spreadsheet when we bring one up. Each item in the product backlog should be valuable to our users or customers. Right? Each item should be valuable to our users or customers. Now, if you've heard of something called user stories, a couple of these are in the form of a user story. Probably the second, third, and fourth, I would say, qualify as essentially user stories. Right? User stories are short, simple statements told from the perspective of a user. Right? As a traveler, I want to be able to book a room in this hotel. Right? As a traveler, I want to be able to specify the type of bed in my hotel room, something like that. These are short, simple statements that a user might have for our system, in that case, a travel system. And in this case, I'm showing a product backlog along with an estimate. Right? Next artifact, something called a sprint goal. Sprint goal, just a short summary of what we're trying to do in that sprint. Right? One or two sentences. And again, this is where I said earlier, this might be for your boss's boss. You park, you get in the elevator, you push the 9 button, and your boss's boss gets in, and your boss's boss says, "What are you working on this sprint?" Well, your boss doesn't want to hear your whole sprint backlog. "Oh, I got to code this, I got to design this. Oh, we got a UI review on this." And they don't want to hear that. They don't even want to hear all of the product backlog items. They want a short 1 or 2 sentence summary. Something like this. Well, this sprint we're working on basic shopping cart functionality. Things like add, review, and update quantities. Right? A couple weeks later, bad timing. You get in the elevator with the boss's boss again. And the boss's boss wants to know what you're working on now. Well, you got another sprint goal. You say, well, this time we're working on the checkout process. Things like paying for an order, picking shipping methods, things like that. All right, so it's a short 1 or 2 sentence summary that we can use for outsiders. Right? Outsiders of the sprint. Okay. Next artifact. Oh, actually, I want to stick with managing the backlog here for a minute because I want to show you a sample one. The sprint backlog is always meant to be an up-to-date reflection of what we have to do, meaning it's never complete. Right? We're going to do a sprint planning meeting and we're going to write the sprint backlog, but we're not going to think of everything. Right? In fact, I don't even want you to think of everything. I want you to think fairly hard, come up with all this easy stuff you can, but don't stay in there forever thinking harder and harder and harder, making that meeting longer than it needs to be. Do a good job, think of the stuff you can, and then let the sprint backlog evolve. New tasks will show up. You'll re-estimate things. Oh, that's harder than I thought. Oh, that's good because this one's easier than I thought. All right, so anybody can add to the sprint backlog once the sprint starts, any team member who discovers something. So the key point here is that work emerges. This whole idea of emergence is a very common thing with Scrum. Right? The product backlog emerges. We don't have the whole thing. The sprint backlog emerges. We don't have everything identified on there. Right? So here's a sample product or sample sprint backlog. We walk out of the sprint planning meeting. Let's say we're doing one this morning. We'd walk out. We might have 5 tasks on there like that. We've got some estimates on there. Tomorrow, things look like this. You'll notice that coding the user interface, about half done. Took that down from 8 hours to 4 hours. Middle tier went from 16 hours to 12 hours. We finished up the online help system. Our tech writer had a good day yesterday. Tech writer didn't work 12 hours, but did get to cross out a 12-hour task. Right? Had a real good productive day, and our tech writer finished that whole task. Wednesday, watch what's going to happen on Wednesday, especially the bottom there. I added a task. Right? This is where we discovered new tasks. I forgot error logging. We didn't think about that during the planning meeting, so we added it on Wednesday. The other thing to notice there on Wednesday is look at the top row. Coding the user interface got harder. Right? I worked on it all day yesterday and went backwards. It's going to be harder than I thought. It's back to 8 hours. Right? So the idea here is that the sprint backlog just represents our best guess at any point in time of what we have to do and how hard it's going to be to do that thing. And then Thursday and Friday. Right? So sprint backlog looking something like this. Another artifact out of the Scrum process is something called a burndown chart. This here is a sprint burndown chart. This is a real one. This is a team in outside of San Francisco, California. And you can see up there in the top left, the very first point is around 780 hours. These guys were doing a 20-day sprint. Those are dates on the bottom. I should have changed those to be more European-style dates. I just didn't think about it. Wasn't looking at it. The first day of that sprint, they had 780 hours of work. The second day, they had more work. They had a productive day. They worked all day on Monday. But when they added things up on Tuesday, they had noticed 2 things. New tasks. Things like error logging on that earlier screen. Oops, new task. And tasks they had identified got bigger. All right, so those two things conspired the first couple of days to send their backlog up. Look in there at about 16, 17 days into the sprint, you'll see a big drop. They dropped 200 hours. Now that's a good day. Well, except they dropped the 200 hours. They didn't actually make 200 hours of progress. They dropped a product backlog item out of the sprint, right? That moved them a whole lot closer to their goal. So with the sprint backlog, all we get to see here, the sprint burndown chart, all we get to see is how far the team is from the goal. Well, we don't know if that was a good or a bad thing. We just see where it is. All right, and they made progress there, but not in a good way. They made it by dropping work. Okay. Here's a sample of making a sprint burndown chart. We add up the work, get a new dot. We put that dot on the chart. The next day, we add up the work there, put a new dot on the burndown chart. So each day, day by day, we're putting these new dots onto the burndown chart. This is something I would expect Scrum Masters to be doing. The Scrum Master will do this in a minute or so a day. A lot of tools will do this in an automated manner. Not a big fan of the tools. They get in the way for other reasons, but a tool does make this part of Scrum a whole lot easier. But hopefully adding numbers up isn't the hardest part of doing Scrum. Right? That'd be nice if it was. Scrum scales. I've worked on a 560-person Scrum team. I have consulted to 3 1,000-person Scrum teams. So actually, I want to change that. I've worked on a 560-person Scrum project, and I've consulted to 3 1,000-person Scrum projects. The first time I said that, I said team. No one is on a 560-person Scrum team, right? Imagine 560 people standing around in a circle trying to get a daily Scrum done in 15 minutes. Right? The point with that is that Scrum scales up by having teams of teams. Right? We don't get one big team, we have teams of teams. So we're still going to keep our Scrum teams in that 7 to 9 range, maybe a little bit bigger. I don't go too big. Remember, we're going to cut the pizza slices too thin. But maybe a little bit bigger when you have a 500-person project. You're going to have 10, 11-person teams more than the 6-person teams, just because of the hassle factor of having that many teams. And so a number of things will influence how we scale this up. One of the key things in scaling up is a meeting. If you've heard about Scrum, you might have heard about this meeting. It's got a very catchy name. I don't think this meeting is as important as its name is catchy. So here's the meeting. The idea is to do what is called a Scrum of Scrums meeting. Picture each of those blocks of team members down there doing a daily Scrum, the little 15-minute meeting. All right, now imagine this is something like Microsoft Office. Right? This makes Microsoft Word. So I've got 3 teams working on Word. But you know what? Word is one product. I want to have one person from each of the Word teams come together and talk about overall Word issues. Right? So we got 3 teams working on Word, but let's pick one person from each of those Word teams, have them get together maybe twice a week, have another meeting. We'll call it a Scrum of Scrums. Actually, that comes to the second level, be Scrum of Scrums. A third level would be a Scrum of Scrums. Right? And these are coordination meetings that we use to coordinate across the multiple teams on a larger project. This is just one of the things we do to scale Scrum up. I think a more important thing we do to scale Scrum up is this. I'm going to call this a community of practice. What I'm showing here are just our 3 Scrum teams. What I want to do is I want to have conversation cut across our Scrum teams. Face it, I need the programmers talking to each other. So we set up this thing called a community of practice, which is a group of like-minded or like-skilled individuals. And so I want the programmers talking to each other. This might just be a shared discussion list, a little shared email list. Maybe it's a shared email list in a monthly meeting. Maybe it's a weekly lunch that the testers have, right? The DBAs, our UI designers, our Scrum Masters as well. The point here is to have ways to have communication cut across our Scrum teams. These communities of practice help us do that. Okay? Not going to focus too much on this. Just here's a list of books that are on Scrum in a significant way. I've got a book on estimating and planning Scrum projects. I've got sessions on that later today. Clinton Keith has a great book on Agile game development with Scrum. This is actually the best book on Scrum to go into all the technical practices. So if you're a programmer or tester really looking to understand Scrum, let me skip testers for a second. If you're a programmer really looking to understand Scrum and the technical practices, real good book on it. Agile Product Ownership. Actually, that book got renamed. It's Agile Product Management. That book's out here. I saw in the bookstore. That's for product owners. Agile Retrospectives. I think that book's here. I know Esther Derby is here tomorrow. Agile Testing. This is why I said skip testers for a moment. Here's the right book for testers. Agile Testing by Lisa Crispin. Coaching Agile Teams by Lisa Adkins. This is a book on all the soft skills for Scrum Masters, all the ways to coach your team to the best performance they can. Essential Scrum is coming out next month. This will be a kind of the best one-book summary of Scrum. Succeeding with Agile is my book. Don't buy that book first. That's kind of a second book on Scrum. Right, it goes into all the specifics. Not a good starting point, but a great second book on Scrum. And then User Stories, I don't know if they have that out there, they might, is about the product backlog. As I mentioned earlier, this presentation is totally available for you. It's up there in PowerPoint in Keynote format. Please take it, make it your own. Use it to convert your companies, your friends, user groups, whatever you want. It's been translated into 23 languages, so go ahead and grab the kanji version and impress your boss with your multilingual skills. Flash up the Romanian version and just go, whoops, was working on my Romanian over the weekend. This is up there on my website, which is mountaingoatsoftware.com. So you go to mountaingoatsoftware.com and you'll find presentations up there, including this one in that format, plus a ton of other presentations. They just asked that I put this in here. I've got classes coming up on Scrum here 3 and 6 months from now. And there's my contact information. I'm around all day today, so I'm fair game anytime for other questions. I've got a lot of other sessions on Agile. Hopefully this one kind of piqued your interest. And again, grab some Scrum tattoos. I don't want to have to fly them home to the U.S., okay? Any questions before we wrap up? Get you guys on your way to the next session a few minutes early. Any questions first? Yeah.
I actually have two, which is one is based on the product backlog. I know you have a separate session on it, but my understanding of it is more high-level user stories. But let's say you have bigger tasks, such as if it's an existing software, so you need to do some major refactoring or like a not visible.
Right.
First question is, how do you get those into the product backlog, which the product owner doesn't necessarily see?
Okay.
And the other one is, if you have a small team and you also have a running soft system, so you get all these immediate like bug fixes and all these things that would affect the team, how can you best protect the team?
Okay. Two real good questions. So the first question is, what do we do about stuff that's not really kind of new feature oriented in the product backlog? Refactoring, cleaning things up, things like installing a new version of Windows or new Linux servers, all that type of stuff. The product backlog is meant to represent anything we need to do to get out a successful product. So those type of things do go onto the product backlog as well. I think if we went back to the example product backlog I had up there, I'll just flash back there while I'm talking. The sample product backlog I had up there had at the bottom of it an item that said to improve exception handling, a purely technical thing. This would be some sort of refactoring thing. We could change that into a user story that was user-focused if we want. As a user, I'd like errors handled in a more appropriate manner so I don't see a bunch of Java jumped on top of the screen or something like that. So I do think those type of things are totally appropriate on a product backlog. Sometimes we do have an issue with the product owner having to convince them that those are worthwhile things. So some teams will get around that by somewhat agreeing with their product owner, look, we're just going to keep a certain amount of our time for ourselves for technical cleanup things. Other times I'll meet teams that'll say we have a hard time convincing our product owner to allow us time for refactoring. All right, so here's my advice on how to get your product owner to allow you time for refactoring if they're not letting you do that. Go to your product owner and make the same arguments about refactoring that you made when you convinced your product owner that you need time to compile your code. You probably didn't have that discussion, did you? Right? That's just part of doing a good job. I have to compile, assuming I'm a compiled language, right? I got to compile my code, right? So, that's not the product owner's business, right? That's just me doing a good job. Me writing good code is just me doing a good job. My product owner doesn't get to tell me about that, right? Now, when I have something that's going to, put me out of commission for 3 weeks while I refactor a huge chunk, okay, now we got to have a conversation. But all those little things that are just about doing a good job, that I'm not going to have a discussion with. In terms of how do we get a team to have time Or how do we protect the team's time if they're working on a new version or a big new set of features, and they're also doing support on the current version that's out there? Here's how I think about this. I think about a sprint as something with volume. So I'll grab my water bottle here. I think about the sprint as something with volume. The first thing that you pour into the sprint is corporate overhead. It takes a certain amount of time to be a good employee here. So I got to pour in corporate overhead. The next thing is plannable time. That's how much time the team has that's their own. Then I have unplanned time. Unplanned time goes to tasks I don't identify, tasks that get bigger than I thought. Now, both of those are kind of my fault, but they also go to interruptions, right? Server's down, Mike, please go fix it, right? So I have to leave some room for unplanned time up here. Now, let's hypothesize two teams here. One team is 2 people in a garage making their first iPad game. Not a lot of corporate overhead, right? Corporate overhead for them is, hey, you order the pizza today, right? A lot of plannable time, not a lot of interruptions. So they have a lot of time that's their own. Now hypothesize another company in a big bureaucracy doing second-level tech support on their shipping product. They have a lot less time that's their own. So when they go to plan their sprint, they will have less time available. When we think about things like, and I think we've got one coming up here shortly, when we think about things like their burndown chart, what I'm saying here is they would not start up as high vertically. They wouldn't have as many hours at the start on that first day. So, okay. Thank you guys very much.